Welcome back to the Natilik podcast. My name is Rob Thorne. Today we have a very special chat with Natilik CEO Mike Danson. 15 months ago, in the early stages of the pandemic, Mike wrote about adapting to a new reality as it was in early 2020. And now, as the world transitions into the next phase of what will become the new normal, we sit down to discuss what he believes is going to be key in making it a success. And we also touch on how the Natilik leadership team are adopting a strategy that offers choice while finding a balanced approach to hybrid work on this episode of the Natilik podcast. Hello listener, season 2 of the podcast continues apace and we've got a really special one for you today. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome back to the Natilik podcast, Natilik CEO Mike Danson. How are you doing, Mike?
Hey, Rob. Good to be back. A few months on since we last spoke.
Good to have you back. It is. Yeah, so it's crazy. I think it's crazy to think it's been 8 months since we recorded that last podcast. And I'd say almost everything seems to have changed and almost stayed the same in equal measure, it feels like. So I was super keen to bring you back as... touch wood, we seem to be once again approaching an inflection point both in the world and also the journey that us and many of our clients are going on at the moment. So obviously by that, I mean the future of work, which remains kind of like a really big topic of conversation, but a little bit of a moving target moving forward. So I know that's something you've been discussing with both our clients and our internal teams quite a lot. So it's always difficult to find a starting point with such a multifaceted topic of conversation. So would you mind first talking us a little bit through where we find ourselves at Natilik and then in the context of the wider world? And I'll throw it over to you there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think we're at an inflection point for English football as well. We obviously have our colleagues in the US and Australia, so I should say soccer. But you never know. You never know. But it's a glorious sporting summer, which is one of the things that, life it's obviously different in many countries around the world, but things feel like, certain things that we all enjoy are starting to come back a little bit. And I think people who know me, sport and things like that are one thing that I find a lot of joy in, and seeing lots of live sport and spectators and seeing people sort of, seeing sporting events coming back to normal is just one of those signs, I think. And I think it's...
this summer compared to last especially, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's night and day, isn't it, around the world in terms of those sort of events. So I think that there definitely feels like there's a change. And of course, it's we're speaking today in the UK and it's, it's slightly different in other parts of the world, but I think it's sort of optimism really as we begin to reconnect with physically with clients and colleagues and we start to get back to some of the things in normal life that we really enjoy. I think it's I
saw you in the office a few weeks ago. That was nice.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So seeing people in the office environment connecting up physically in different other locations, and it's sort of there's an optimism, I think, returning, but it's still tricky, right? I mean, it's a tricky situation. I was talking about post-COVID the other day, and I'm not sure post-COVID is actually a thing. I think it's something that we've got to get used to living with, and I think that's the direction of travel for probably most countries now. I think is there's an acceptance, I think, from national governments that it's there might have been different approaches from different governments. And I think you can still contrast probably almost the polar extremes if you take the sort of Australian approach and contrast that with maybe the UK and the US approach. And I mean, it's remarkable. I think I was just looking at the numbers earlier, actually, and Australia still have had less than 1,000 deaths. It's incredible, really, when you think about the size of the population and you're less than 1,000 deaths when you look at countries like the UK have had almost 130,000 deaths.
But then I was reading about, I think I was reading an article over the weekend about how almost the UK is going to become the petri dish for the world, right? And that we're kind of going, look, we're going to combat the rising cases with the rising vaccinations and let's just see how it goes. We're going to live with it. So very valid point. Super interesting to see the difference.
Yeah, I think that's, and the vaccination thing is remarkable. That's I think since we well, when we last spoke, that was, I think there might have just been some news that actually, something was on the horizon, and you
Right.
think about how many vaccinations have been given now, but as you in the US and the UK, as over 50%, I think, of people now have been double vaccinated, and so there's a sort of sense of optimism. I think the only thing I touch on for our, friends in Australia and our colleagues there, just I think this phrase of learning to live with it, I think, is something. I don't think there's a world of zero COVID, and I think in countries like Australia, we've got to be careful that it's been an incredible success story to limit the hospitalisations and deaths, but with only 7% of the country populated, there's got to be. I think the global economy and global citizenship needs international movement, right? And I think that's something that will hopefully come about sooner rather than later. And again, the developing world needs huge amounts of help, right? I mean, there's the countries are still around the world at different stages, but I think we are. I think there's an optimism, a general overall optimism, I would say, across our business globally, that we're sort of heading in the right direction, and things are starting to come back. And I think this is one of the interesting points. Is I think there's a number of things that we all want to come back in everyday life and in business life, but there's also things that we want to hold on to from what we've been through. For those of us that have experienced home working for the first time, or that degree of flexibility and those kind of things. So I think that's going to sort of mark out, I think, the next chapter of this. I think is what do we go back to that we really enjoyed, and what do we sort of hold on to in terms of things that have come about because of this pandemic. So I think that's perhaps marks out. I'm not sure that answered your question. But that gives a sense of sort of context, I guess, to sort of where my head's at with the sort of situation as we talk in sort of early July.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that sets good context not only in the real world but also in the business world. And I think when we last sat down, you mentioned the once in a lifetime opportunity that we had in front of us, and I think since then there's been quite a few high profile and quite polarizing opinions, I would say, on how we make the most of that opportunity, or whether we take advantage of that opportunity at all. And you've seen some companies stick to their guns. You've seen some being a little bit more indecisive and changing their minds and so on and so forth. But 8 months on, where do you stand, Mike, in terms of how you see us moving forward, both at Natilik and the wider world? And I'm interested to hear, some of the conversations that, some of the things that you're getting from the conversations you're having with our clients and our leaders within the business, things like that.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's I think with most things in life, that there's a sort of easy choice or a sort of harder choice, and often what comes from the harder choices are perhaps better outcomes. I think it's so you're right. I think there's been some real polar extremes on the we want everybody back in the office. So sort of a stance which says, right, basically what we had pre-COVID is exactly what we all want, and we should all be back in the office, and that's the way forward, and sort of forget this sort of thing ever happened, and that's the way we should move forward. And then you have the polar extreme, which is, okay, we've experienced working from home, and now we're going to ask everybody in the entire organization to work from home forever. And I think those two polar extremes are very simple, probably quite easy, but I'm not sure they're right. Well, in fact, I'm convinced they're not right. I just think that's not. To be frank, I'm not sure that's the reality of businesses anyway. Pre-COVID, because a lot of organisations had already introduced the concept of flexible working, and some were early on that path, some were quite developed. But I think there was a degree of flexibility in a number of organisations. Obviously, certainly within Natilik, but across our client base and wider economy. I think there was already choice. And so if organisations are going down the path of removing that choice, either way, to be at home forever or be in the office forever, I just think that's a missed opportunity. And I'll go back to I think that expression of a once in a generation opportunity to rewire the way we work, I think is out there. It's still a prize worth fighting for. I think it's got to be seen as an opportunity. To get a better balance, I think. But the problem is it's not easy, and you have a number of big factors in there, I think, for organisations and for individuals to get their heads around to realise that opportunity. And I think that's where the devil is, and always in the detail, isn't it? Is that if we want that flexibility, if organisations and individuals want that flexibility, then it's going to be tricky, and it's going to require some choices to be made about how organisations operate moving forward. And I think, but I think that. Having said that, there are ways to help simplify that flexibility, and that's what we're trying to look at both within Natilik and across our clients.
And in the context of Natilik as an international company, coming back to something you said there, you mentioned the fact that COVID has had a drastically different impact country to country. Do you think that will play a part in our thinking?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure actually because I think if you look at that sort of frame of reference and go everyone in, everyone at home, or somewhere in the middle, I think that somewhere in the middle is probably what everybody wants. And I think regardless of country and regardless of stage of progress through COVID, I think that's the prize. I think the prize is flexibility and choice, and I think that's what people want. So I'm not sure it's necessarily governed by the particular country. I think people will get there at different stages, but I think that's the prize. I think, and it's more within. I guess it's sort of breaking that down. And if one wants to offer choice, what complexities does that bring? And I think there's considerations around people, there's considerations around technology, there's considerations around real estate, and they all have to be factored in, I think, to find a way that sort of works for the individuals and works in terms of delivering, continues to deliver an amazing service to clients. But it's in a way, having a choice is a bit of a blessing, isn't it? Because there's plenty of people who haven't had that choice, and I think again that's one of the things that organisations have to grapple with sort of frontline staff who physically have to be in places to make organisations work, and those that have a choice, and that's been a pretty stark contrast, I think, over the last 15-18 months. Is those that basically their job requires physical presence, and others that can work almost anywhere. And I think that there's one has to be mindful as well against around the sort of tension that might bring in an organisation to those that have a choice and frankly those that don't. And I think that's probably part of the mix of the future of work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've got a podcast coming up in a few weeks' time, actually, with one of our clients, Europa Worldwide, who, again, one of their sort of the overriding feedback from our project, which was in flight when COVID started, was just how sort of above and beyond some of what we'd probably class as frontline workers or, our engineers were in terms of throwing themselves at that project to make it a success as well. And from speaking to some of our engineers, that's been really interesting to hear, just again, all the additional precautions and things that they had to take as well. And I think more than anything, and you've mentioned it there too, just the different effects that COVID has had on different types of organizations and companies has been really interesting to look at too, especially with the conversations that we've had with some of our partners and clients and things like that. Some of the feedback on the last podcast that we did, Mike, was that people were really interested to see sort of how, again, the inner workings and things that were going on at Natilik as well. So both from how we've done just, last year, I think it was probably six months in. This time it's, another 8 months on from that. So would you mind talking about that a little bit, just in terms of how we've, how things have been performing and how that's going to affect the way that we move forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of Natilik, we've fared very well, and I think I said at the time, I think it always comes with the sort of caveat of we're lucky, right? We're in a great sector, great business in a great sector, and we had the opportunity to grow. So I mean, we've grown in the last 12 months, and we're very thankful for that. And I think we've continued to deliver amazing client service by being innovative and trying different things and having a sort of new way of working. But it's really it's really worked for us. We've done very well. We've brought on new people, we've grown, we've innovated, and as we approach this, we're sort of just coming up to the end of our first quarter in this new fiscal, and we've got some very ambitious plans for this year in terms of, getting back to sort of almost like 30% sort of pre-COVID growth, all organically. So we're super proud of that. But your heart still goes out to businesses that are still struggling and are still struggling. And again, I think I said at the time, COVID hasn't necessarily differentiated between good and bad businesses. It's differentiated between sectors. So I think there's still people out there really struggling with, current restrictions that affect their business or things they've had to do to get through this period. So I think as as individuals, there's and as companies and as countries, there's sort of short-term things that you see, that impact you and you can see them. But there's also that underlying ramifications that I think will be there for a while. Businesses that have been affected, kids' education that's been affected, mental health and well-being that's been affected. Just as a whole, what this pandemic has done, both in things that we can see today and things that will probably play out over the next 2 or 3 years, is many years to come. It will be interesting. But I think as from a Natilik standpoint, we're very lucky, we're very blessed. We've had a really great last year, and we're looking forward to an equally good one this year. So that's a blessing, and we're very thankful for that. Yeah.
And Mike, you mentioned the complexity coming from choice and flexibility and things. Can I draw you out a little bit more on that in terms of what do you think are going to be the key questions and the key considerations around that moving forward, both for us and in the wider industry?
Yeah, I think I sort of think there's probably maybe 3 areas. You think about the impact on people, the impact on technology, impact on real estate, and I think that it's tricky. And I think if you sort of explore each of those in turn, if you think from a people perspective, one of the obvious things is people who are early in their career versus people who are perhaps at the other end of their career, and the choices that those groups might make, and they might not also be obvious choices, but the stereotypical sort of playback of that is that early in career people really need that office environment to get that sort of informal learning and a way to really understand how businesses work, understanding how roles work, and you want to be surrounded by that, and almost the sort of the osmosis that you get, that sort of learning you get from just being around people.
100%.
And then perhaps the people who are further into their careers, perhaps have got families, or they've got commitments that they've done a lot of their sort of in-career learning, and they're very established, and they've got other commitments and things like that. And maybe those people are more happier and easy, find the flexibility really useful. And so that's very stereotypical, right? That doesn't cover everybody in those categories, but that could be the case. And so one has to think about in a people environment, how do you square that away? How do you make sure that there's still an environment where you get a mix of people, and it's not just one thing you could say, well, we're offering lots of opportunity for our early in career people to come in, but if they're mixing together and not getting some of that sort of magic gold dust of insight from people who've perhaps been in those roles for many more years, then I think that's something to think about. So that from a people perspective, I think also it's interesting that people. I think this is perhaps largely the case in businesses now. Is if you wanted to go into an office, you could go into an office as an employee. There wasn't really much in terms of pre-booking of resources and that kind of stuff necessarily. I get the sense that sort of it was people have been experimenting with hot desking and all that kind of stuff. But generally, if you wanted to go in, you perhaps could go in. And I think that's going to be challenged now. Is if you're going to have to be far more premeditated in the way that people use office space if people want the flexibility. Clearly, without the flexibility, it's easy. You just cater an office to have as many people in as are employed in the company, or you go to some formal hot desking and you just get on with it, and it's easy. But when you start to say, well, actually, maybe people are telling us that they're going to come in 50% less, so we're going to put our real estate together with people coming in 50% less. And what happens if people then suddenly don't do that and they want to come in more? And then I think that's when you have, they're potentially going to be challenges then between people's, choice and discipline of using offices and the offices that businesses are going to create. So I think I think that's that's the sort of people perspective. I think it's individual choice. Just in those things brings complexity, doesn't it? And again, back to that sort of early career versus late in career. Late in career, people may not want to be in an office, but perhaps they need to be in the office selflessly to pass on some of that knowledge. So that perhaps just gives some idea around the
I think so.
sort of people side. The knock on is there with the property, right? So if you're, and I think there's still a lot of head scratching going on with what the people do with their real estate, and often they're on very long leases. Of course, there's flexible office accommodation out there, and of course, organisations can take advantage of that. But I think if you want your property, your real estate to be a sort of physical embodiment of your culture, then if you go down the serviced office route, I think that's sometimes a bit challenging, because perhaps there are some constraints as to what you can do there in terms of being able to stamp your brand and on your property. So I think there's still a world out there that is tricky, from essentially long-term leases trying to cater for flexibility in real estate strategy, and I think that's tricky and requires some thought. And of course, so does the technology, right? I mean, if one wants to offer that choice, then I think a stat we continue to refer back to from research that's been done is, if you offer the flexibility, then 98-99% of meetings moving forward are going to have at least one remote participant, and that's a challenge, right? When lots of people are working from home or lots of people work in the office, that's perhaps actually quite easy. But when people start to reconnect, remobilize, and are in places they want to be when they want to be, that clearly will bring complexity, and people's collaboration and security strategies will need to consider that and work out how one gets the right balance in offering choice and doing what I think people want, but getting the outcomes right and getting it right for clients. That is the great, I think, challenge for Natilik and for other organisations, for our clients moving forward. I think I'll sort of repeat what I said earlier. There's an amazing opportunity to kind of rewire the way that we do things for the better, and to get some amazing outcomes. Not just for people, by the way, but I think for clients. I think there's some outcomes that we've found that we can deliver to clients in a new way of working, which we should hold on to. So there's a great prize out there, but the people, the real estate, the technology, the sort of policies and processes that sit alongside that. There's a big prize, but it's going to come with some thought and some work, and that's a lot of the conversations that we're having with our clients, is how we can support this new way of working, this new flexibility, and help them capture this amazing prize moving forward.
Yeah. Period of adapting to the old and the new again, right? Again, those face-to-face meetings has kind of like captured that magic of, sitting around the table with people, throwing ideas around and things like that. And that learning by osmosis is really important to me. I think when we, when the feedback, when we were asked for our feedback, that was one of my biggest concerns. That was a big part of my development at Natilik, was learning from some of my peers, my more experienced peers, and things like that. Yeah. And that is something that I think a lot about. So again, very, very, very pertinent point, I think, and that's going to be really important too. So
yeah. And the other thing I'll say is not to be too sort of melodramatic about it, but there's a real human joy of physically connecting with people, and I think that's whether it's personally or with colleagues or whatever. I think again, in every organisation, that there is a spectrum of personality types and takes on risk profiles and those kind of things. But I think we know we want to offer choice. We want to give people that flexibility. But as we reconnect over these next few weeks and months, just encouraging people to make sure they don't miss out on that opportunity to have that physical contact, because it's so good. I think I think any human being ultimately needs that in their life, and I think we've all had those moments, haven't we, where you just being with people and the kind of conversations that the way that you feel is different, and as much as we're doing this over video again and today, then maybe in a few more months' time it will be a face-to-face podcast in the Natilik studios.
Still not done one yet, yeah. But I did put a request in for some equipment for in the office. So look forward to seeing that come by your desk at some point with the studio. That's definitely something we need to consider as part of those property plans, I'd say.
Correct.
I would say. Not biased whatsoever. So Mike, that's been really insightful. Thank you very much. I found it really, really useful, and I think a lot of our clients are going to as well, and I'm excited to see where things head in the future. So thanks again for your time. It was really, 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 really great to speak to you.
Great, yeah. Great to be back on, Rob. Thanks for giving me some space again. It's always good to connect. So yeah, cheers, Rob. Speak soon.
Thanks for listening to Nat Chat, the Natilik podcast. Please subscribe to the Natilik podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. And leave us a review while you're there. It really helps us improve and grow the show. Please note that opinions expressed on the Natilik podcast are those of the hosts or our guests, not the organisations that they represent. You can find more information on Natilik on our website, that's natilik.com. You can also find us on social media. On Twitter, we're at Natilik Group, as well as Facebook and LinkedIn. Our theme music was provided by Dan Short, who you can find at Danzer, that's DANZR, on music streaming services. This is Rob Thorpe, and thanks again for listening.